webinar planned for you today. It looks like there are about 86 folks logged into this meeting room right now, so feel free to continue saying hello, and throughout the presentation, feel free to post your questions in there, and we'll hold on to them during breaks, and then we hope to get to them by the end of today's presentation. And it's been so nice seeing so many of you log on throughout the entire year. This is our 8th course, and we know some of you have been with us since January, and so it's really we're just so happy to have so many of you participating, and we really hope that this has been a helpful resource to everyone. Again, this is our 8th course, so the entire series, Caring for Yesterday's Treasures Today, will eventually be up and archived on the online community, so you're welcome to go back at any time and review these recordings, to look at the resources. They will all be there, and we owe a huge debt to the Institute of Museum and Library Services for providing funding for this entire series. It's been made possible by a Laura Bush 21st Century Librarian Program Grant. And we're also fortunate to have Learning Times and Mike on board with us for this project. They've been instrumental in helping us with our website and also on these webinars. Now, before we move on to the topic, I'll just go over some quick logistics and what you can expect once this course has concluded. To officially complete this course, we just ask for a few things. The first is that you're registered in our system, so we have an email address for you. We ask you to watch all the webinars in this series and complete all the homework assignments. And the assignments are due no later than Thursday, November 21st. And it looks like I have all 5, but for this course, of course, there's only 4, so please excuse that typo. So we've made some slight adjustments to the way we award certificates. For those of you who complete the course, you will receive an email notification that includes your name, the number of instruction hours, and other pertinent course information. This will, in essence, serve as your certificate and proof of your achievement. And as always, you will receive a digital credential from Credly.com. If you participated in some of our past courses, you know that we had been mailing paper certificates. Now, we do know that those 8.5 by 5.5 pieces of paper have become important to some folks, so we want to make sure to accommodate those participants. So we do have some other options. We can email you an image of your certificate, and you can print it out yourself, or if we absolutely have to, we can print it and mail it to you. But it would be great if you could help us save a little bit on postage. Now, you'll see on today's homework assignment, which is the evaluation, a spot to denote how you'd like to receive your certificate. So make sure to check that off so we know how to get that to you. And as in past courses, this is our final evaluation, but you will also see a few questions from our instructor today. And if you have not been completing the homework assignments because you weren't necessarily interested in receiving that certificate, we'd still love it if you could complete that last assignment because it is the evaluation, and we would love to hear what you think. So what's next? So shortly following this webinar, we'll send you an email with links to all the webinar recordings in this course and all the homework assignments, so you have everything in one place. Again, all the materials, all those homework assignments are due 1 week from today. And shortly following that deadline, we'll pull down all the links to the homework assignments on the course webpage, and we will post recordings of all these great webinars so that everyone has access to them. Staff at Heritage Preservation will then begin the process of logging all your homework and tracking attendance. And once we've done that, it does take us a bit of time. About a week, we'll send out your email notification and your online credential. And then if you haven't done so already, I invite you to consider joining the Connecting to Collections online community. Membership is free and does give you access to post on the discussion board, which is a great resource, and a lot of people have some great feedback. And as always, if you have questions even after this course has concluded, feel free to contact us at info@heritagepreservation.org, or feel free to call us. We're here to help you, even if we don't have a course happening. So make sure to utilize us. So now, without further delay, I am so pleased to welcome Dana Allen-Greal. Dana leads the digital strategy for education at the National Gallery of Art. She specializes in leveraging technology to help nonprofits engage constituents, demonstrate value, and stay relevant. Her past positions have included account director at Ogilvy, I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, public relations. She's been an adjunct faculty member in museum studies at the George Washington University and Johns Hopkins University. She was the chief of digital outreach and engagement at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, and online communications and publishing coordinator at the Kaiser Family Foundation. We are in fantastic hands today. I am so excited to welcome you, Dana.
Hi.
And
I'm excited to be here.
Good. I'm going to move this out of the way and then completely hand things over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I am very excited to be here today to talk with you about social media. It's a big love of mine. So I look forward to kind of talking with you about how you can use social media to tap into your enthusiast communities and open up access to your collections and your expertise. I'm just going to give a quick caveat before I get started, which is if you did download the slides ahead of time, you'll see there is a lot. And there may be some slides that I don't spend a lot of time on as we go through because I'm going to try to tailor it a bit to your interests and needs. So just keep in mind that those slides are there for you for reference and you can download them at any time. And also we'll have time for Q&A at the end so I can go back to anything that you felt like you wanted a little more information about. So let's get started. We're actually going to start with a poll, 2 polls actually. And what I would like to know are, number one, what are your biggest concerns about social media? And I did look through some of the pre-course surveys to get a sense of where you all are. So I wanted to dig a little deeper and find out what are you concerned about with social media? And then number 2, what are you most interested in or excited about in terms of implementing social media? I'll give you a second to click on those and just for your information, the one on the right, you can pick as many as you want. So it looks like a lot of you are not sure if you're doing a good job or reaching your goals, concerned about your use of time and resources. And you're excited about reaching more people, being relevant, engaging people in dialogue. Excellent. Okay. So in terms of not knowing if you're doing a good job of reaching our goals, I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, even if they've been doing social media in a pretty advanced way for several years. So I'm going to try and tackle that, definitely. But just know that I think we're all kind of in that boat, same boat, trying to figure it out. And similarly with time and resources, we all have a finite amount of time and resources, no matter how large of the institution we're in. And with social media, there's a new platform every day. There's always more you could be doing. And so I think that's a common concern that you'll have even if you consider yourself a pretty advanced user. Okay, let's go ahead and clear those out. Thank you. Okay, so a quick overview of the structure of today's webinar. There are 4 sections. In the first section, we're going to talk a little bit about setting goals. And again, even if you're not new to social media, I think it's still worthwhile to take a step back and think about what are your goals, have you articulated them, have you actually written them down and shared them with other people? Number 2, selecting platforms. How do you select the right channels to match your audience and goals? 3, we'll talk about creating content. How can you plan for content development? How can you be more efficient? And how can you make sure that you're creating content that's actually engaging your audience and not just broadcasting? And finally, we'll talk a little bit about evaluating success. So how can you assess the performance of your social media efforts and figure out if there are things you can do to make it better and if you're meeting your goals? So that's kind of the rough outline of how things will go today. Before we get started with goals, I do want to just say that because social media is it's still pretty new and still kind of sexy, I guess, and I'm, a big enthusiast myself, I think we often think about the benefits and maybe not so much about some of the downsides. So I just want to go through a couple of these items to consider. So obviously, social media oftentimes is free or inexpensive. However, it does take time, and it isn't the cure for everything, which if you're already using it, you know that. It is easy to use. It usually doesn't require a lot of technical knowledge. You don't need to be a computer programmer to use Facebook. However, I think to do social media well, you don't necessarily want to kind of turn over the reins of social media to someone who doesn't understand what it's like to communicate on behalf of an organization. That's not to say that interns can't be working on social media for you. I've had amazing interns coordinate social media on behalf of even pretty large institutions. It just means that you need to be a mentor to that person and make sure that they have the resources they need to understand how your institution typically communicates, what's appropriate to say and not to say. And just keep in mind that if I use Facebook personally, it doesn't mean I know how to manage a community of museum or library fans necessarily. Other benefits, there is a large potential audience. However, you need to make sure that you're going to the right platform for the audience that you specifically want to reach. Social media is designed to be easily shared. That's a great benefit, and I think that's why it's also such a huge potential audience, because you're reaching people who may already know about you and like you, and then they share with their network, and you have now a much larger potential audience. And social media is increasingly important for how your organization gets picked up by search engines. So more and more, Google, for example, is looking at, do you have fresh content? Are people sharing it? And that will determine how well you're showing up when someone does a Google search for your topic or your organization's name. And I'm just going to pause for a second and giving a note about the audio. 1 second so I can increase my audio. Sorry. Okay, is that better? I hope. With all those instructions, okay? Okay, great. And then one final thing to consider about social media is that, let's say you have amazing images that you've been posting to Instagram for about a year. And it's unlikely, but let's say Instagram goes away. Where are all those images? It's just something to think about. As you're posting content to social media, are you also posting it or keeping it somewhere accessible on your own website so people can find it in its archive? It may not make sense for all the kinds of content you use on social media, but it is something to consider, that it's always good if you can and you have the resources, you have the same content on your website as well. Okay, so let's launch into goals. So let's think about what outcomes are you hoping to achieve with social media. Social media is active. I think probably the first thing you do when you start using social media is you start using it as another broadcast channel. You show things, you publish things, you share things, and that's a great way to use social media. But there is a lot more that you can do with it. You can discuss, you can interact, you can crowdsource, you can co-create. You can do things so much more easily on social media than we've ever really had the tools to be able to use in the past. So it's really a big opportunity for us to go beyond that broadcast model. So here are some examples of what those things might mean for museums and libraries and other organizations with collections. You might be using social media to have access to your collections and your expertise, and this is actually a photo from a tweet up at the National Museum of American History, in which real-life people were invited into a real-life collection storage space and then asked to tweet about their experience. You can see the person on the left is looking at her smartphone and tweeting about the collection she's seeing firsthand. You might be using it to brand your staff as experts, keep your fans updated on your progress, to build excitement about an event or exhibition or other happenings. You can use it to tap into enthusiast communities, bring people behind the scenes, engage people in meaningful conversations, ask for feedback, and even encourage audiences to take action. And that's a photo of people in line to vote for the Minnesota 150 project, in which it was the 150th anniversary of Minnesota statehood. And people were asked to nominate moments or objects or people from Minnesota history that were important to include in an exhibition. And that had both an in-person component and an online component. So, why are you using social media? What is it that you hope to achieve? And I would actually like you to just take 30 seconds and write down, what are your initial thoughts on why you're using social media? And if you'd like to, please go ahead and also include it in the chat window. Share it with us. Great. You all are so quick to answer. You've clearly thought about this before, and that's great. Please keep these goals in mind as we go throughout the rest of the presentation, because everything that we do should tie back to these goals. Every decision you make about where to spend your time should tie back to you're trying to connect with people and turn them into supporters, or you want to attract more visitors to your physical location. Okay, thanks for sharing. Back to, here we go. So the second piece of what you're trying to achieve is, who are you trying to achieve it with or for? Who are you wanting to reach? And I'm going to just skip ahead to this slide and come back. It is very tempting to say our audience is everyone. And of course, we are here to serve the public, and that means a wide audience and to be accessible and important and useful to a wide range. But in order to actually achieve that kind of a goal, you need to kind of slice and dice your audience into segments. Let's go back to this and think about, okay, yes, we want to reach everyone, but let's start with, who are our stakeholders, or who are we really trying to serve, or maybe who are we trying to reach that we don't really reach right now? Maybe it's teachers, maybe it's volunteers, maybe it's people in your local community. And I'm actually going to ask you to write down, again, who are your target audiences? But I want you to think about, for social media, are your target audiences people that you already might reach on some other platform? Or are they people that you had a hard time connecting with? Social media is a way for you to connect with an audience you may not have been able to reach otherwise. Maybe you want an international audience that's really difficult for you to do with your physical space. Or are you really trying to build a stronger relationship with an audience that you might already have a relationship with, but this is a way for you to turn your connection with students into something larger. So I see academic researchers, local community, researchers worldwide, students. Right. Okay. So again, keep your goal in mind and your audiences in mind as we move forward. And this next slide shows a template that I've used to help kind of visualize who my audience is and remind me who I'm writing for or who I'm trying to serve when I'm creating content for social media. So you could actually print out this template and fill it in. Say, let's pick researchers or let's pick families. That's one audience that you've talked about here. Who might represent a family for you? You know, give them a name, an age, what do they do for a living, where do they live, what are they interested in, and then what social networks do they use, as well as what technology. Are they, are they using computers at the local library, or do they have a laptop at home? Are they always using their smartphone? And even draw a picture of them. I'm going to give you an example of this. This was used at a brainstorm at the National Gallery in talking with my colleagues that work in education. So here's Frank. He has a nice little mustache. He's 45. He's the principal of a large high school. He likes hiking and restoring antique furniture. He's active on Facebook and Twitter, and he really loves gadgets. So I actually will take something like this and have this person's profile kind of posted up in my office to remind me that when I write something, I'm writing for Frank. Here's another example. This is Tina Young. She's 23. She's a new teacher. She teaches 4th grade students at C2CC Public School. She likes making jewelry. She's on every platform I can think of. She's really into her mobile devices. So what kind of content I write for her may be different from the kinds of content I might write for Frank. So I find this to be a really useful exercise, even if you really know your audiences well. And actually what you could even do is invite some of those audiences in and have them work with you to fill out a profile to help you better understand who they are online. Okay, so that's step one, your goals and your audiences. Now let's talk about platforms. Where are your audiences online? Where's Frank and where's Tina? And how can we connect with them? And I want to tell you about a tool that I find to be extremely useful. It's called the Digital Engagement Framework, and I don't have time within the context of this webinar to kind of explain this whole diagram, but luckily there is a free book that goes along with this that you can just download if you go to Digital Engagement Framework. It will explain everything about this framework and how to use it for brainstorming and coming up with strategy in your organization. But I'm going to use it a little bit to help you understand why I'm talking so much about outreach and engagement in the coming slides. So your assets. Your assets are things like your collection, your staff, your building. Your assets are essentially the things you have to offer your audience, so it's physical and digital. Your audience we've already talked about. Those are people that you already have a relationship with that you want to build the digital relationship a little stronger, or they're people that you're not really reaching yet and want to. So it's both your current and your potential audience. And you've got outreach and engagement. What you see is that there are arrows connecting assets and audience through reach. And then from right to left, your audience to your assets through engagement. So what this means is I might use something in my collection or some asset that I have as part of an outreach to a new audience. So how can I do that? What platform can I use to reach a new audience online or reach an audience online that I'm not currently connected with? And then once I have their attention, what can I do to engage them with that asset? What can I ask them to participate in? Can I have them tell me a story or help me identify something in a photograph? And so the key difference here between reach and engagement is reach is really that first connection to that audience, and engagement is all of the things you do after you've caught their attention to keep their attention and to get them active and to try and turn them into advocates. So this is a part of the digital engagement framework, and it talks about reach, which is that first step, and then you'll see interest, involve, and activate, and those are part of engagement. And the reason I really like the digital engagement framework, again, is that it focuses so much on activation and how you can dialogue and get people interested in building a stronger relationship with you. It's not just about posting content to channels. It's about getting people involved. So reach is your first step. How are you going to find them? How are you going to connect with them? The second is interest. You've got my attention. What am I going to offer those audiences to keep them interested? Think about your Facebook fans. What are you doing to make sure that you have interesting content every week for them? The next step in engagement, think of this as sort of ramping up your engagement. How are you going to involve people? How will you invite them to participate? What are you going to ask them to do? And this takes a little more thinking beyond, here's a photo of something in our collection. How do you invite them into the work that you do, and how do you help them come along with you and appreciate your work and your collections by being involved? And sort of the last step, the holy grail, is activate. How do you turn that fan And this will always only be a certain percentage of your fans. But how do you turn those fans into advocates? How do you get them so interested and involved that they now want to share their enthusiasm with your organization, or for your organization with others? So we're going to think about these phases of engagement as we go through the various platforms, and think about how we can use social media platforms for reach, but also keep people interested, to involve them, and to activate. Okay. We have another quick poll, and this is to help me figure out which of the next several slides to focus on, since we do have a limited amount of time. There's two questions here. One is, which platforms are you currently using? And which platforms do you want to know more about today? Okay, so it looks like a lot of you are on Facebook and Twitter, and you want to know more about everything. Let's see. Tumblr and Instagram, it looks like, are rising to the top. But in general, it looks like you're kind of interested in all of these platforms. So I think the way I'll approach the next couple of slides then is I'll try to touch on all of the platforms. But again, the slides are there for you to come back to later if you want more examples or to dig deeper. And also, if you have a specific question about a platform or really anything that I say, please include it in the chat window and include your email address if you'd like me to follow up with you after the webinar. I'm happy to do that. I'll go back through the whole chat window and find if you have a specific question, and I will email you with my response. Okay, so let's go ahead. So Facebook, most of you are on Facebook. I'm not going to say that much about it other than that it is a great platform for all kinds of content, for images, for video, for links, and for engaging in discussions, which is actually something that can be challenging on some of the other platforms because they're maybe not set up as easily for conversation as Facebook is. Twitter is something that is good for short bursts of information. You see a lot of links being shared on Twitter. Images are actually pretty important on Twitter as well, and I'll show you some examples of that. Twitter is also really great for live chats using hashtags, and I found incredible numbers of participation when you schedule something specific to happen on Twitter. Pinterest is good for organizing and sharing images and videos that you may already have posted somewhere online. So let's say you have a lot of artwork canvas on your website in your collections area, let's say. You can go ahead and pin that artwork into a board, and what it will do is pull in the image as well as a link back to your website. So this is one of the nice things about Pinterest, is that it sort of points back to the original source. And if I'm a subscriber to your board, I now see whenever you've got new artwork of Canvas posted on your website, and I'll get it in my feed on Pinterest. And I can repin it to my own board. Instagram is really good for sharing, I would say, especially new photos and videos. And Instagram is often used for maybe you wouldn't post in other places. So say you well, we see here from Mount Vernon, we've got photos of events. We've got a collage from an event. We've got a close-up of an object. And Instagram started as an app, and I think you can often tell if something was an Instagram photo if it's used somewhere else, which we'll talk about cross-posting in a little bit. But they're usually the square crop, and there's often kind of a fun artistic filter applied to it. Maybe there's some interesting coloring or shadows, and I think that's something that's appealing about Instagram to people, is that they can take their photos from from an iPhone or something like that and make them look earthy and high quality. Tumblr is essentially a blogging platform, and though it can be used for longer form text, it's usually used for short pieces, often image-centered. There are a lot of Tumblr blogs that focus on animated GIFs, which are kind of a new, well, they're not new, but they've become all the rage recently. And the nice thing about Tumblr is that it's designed so that people can easily reblog your content. So when thinking about how to use Tumblr, I would especially think about, are there things you want people to reblog or repost on their own Tumblr? Vine is something that is part of Twitter, and it's for creating short videos. And again, you need an app to use Vine. But basically, the max limit for a Vine video is 6 seconds, which is kind of a fun constraint. Because what happens is you get kind of a quick little snapshot of something. And unfortunately, I couldn't embed the Vine video here, but this is the Connecticut Historical Society. It says this won't hurt a bit. And what it has is actually 6 1-second quick little shots of the various things you might find in this exhibit. So I get a 6-second kind of impression of this exhibition and the objects that are in it. Google Plus is actually a lot like Facebook in some ways, in that it's pretty visual. The commenting features are quite visible. And it can be used for a lot of different kinds of content as well as discussions. But if you are not on Google Plus, I would recommend considering it because it actually has a lot to do with your search engine ranking. And if you have a Google Plus page, someone looking for you or your content is going to find you much higher rated within Google if you have a Google Plus page. It's also really good if you already are using YouTube and you have your videos on YouTube. It integrates quite well with Google. And related, if you have a Google Plus page, you can use Google Plus Hangouts on Air. And they are essentially little kind of live video events that you can have with up to 10 people. You can see here, they are not, I would not say that Google Plus is for super high production video chats. What you see there are just people kind of looking into their webcams. But what you can do is have a pretty intimate, interesting conversation with up to 10 people, but you can broadcast that to anyone who wants to watch. Or you can choose not to. So there are different ways that you might use it. For example, if you wanted to have kind of a focus group type conversation with, let's say, 9 teachers around the country who you work with, you could have a private Google Hangout with just those 9 teachers and you can see each other and have a video chat, and you can record it. But you could also have that kind of a conversation and broadcast it. And essentially it will be broadcast on your YouTube channel for anyone to participate in. And down on the bottom, you can see this is one that MoMA did, and it's a new feature of Google Plus Hangouts on Air. But people can also ask questions, and you see this +16, +23. Everyone who is watching the Google Plus Hangout on Air can submit a question, or they can vote on a question. So the most interesting questions will rise to the top, and then the moderator can ask those questions. And so it's an interesting way, and this is free, I should point out, to have a video conversation with a large group of people. Just want to check, can everybody hear me okay? I'm seeing something about lost audio. I'll keep moving, but I will assume that you can hear me okay. Okay. Now, Reddit. Reddit is a really interesting platform, and I think Reddit is very different from the other kinds of platforms that we've talked about, in that you don't necessarily have sort of a landing page that people become fans of and that you're posting content to all the time. But something that Reddit does really well is discussions. And here's an example of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, doing what's called an AMA, which is Ask Me Anything. And essentially what you do is you say, hey, I am this person, and I'm going to AMA. You can ask me anything during this time. The President of the United States has done this, and in this case, curators at a museum did this. They basically said, hi, we're 2 curators from the Holocaust Museum, and we want to answer any question you could possibly have. And I believe they did this for 1 hour, and they got 200-something questions and comments. So that's a quick overview of all of these different platforms. This is your kind of cheat sheet. If there's a platform that you haven't considered trying, maybe just go ahead and subscribe personally and see how people are using it and see if it might work for you. I want to go back to the audiences that you identified. So in terms of who is using these different platforms, Pew Internet and American Life Project is a fantastic place to find out about demographics and research on how people are using the internet, period, but social media as well. So this is the latest data on who is using what platform. And this is a really interesting stat. So 67% of online users are on any social networking site. And 67% of all online users who answered the survey are on Facebook. So what does this mean? This means that if you use social media at all, you are on Facebook. So it seems like almost all of you who are on Facebook, that's a good move because most of your audience might be on Facebook. Of all of the platforms, that would be the one. If you had to only pick one, that might be the one to pick because the largest percentage of online users are on Facebook, followed by Twitter, and then Pinterest, Instagram, and Tumblr. Okay. Now, Pew also looks at who are these people, not just what percentage of people who are online, but who are these people who are using these platforms. In terms of all social networking sites, it's especially appealing for 18 to 29-year-olds and women. In general, will be on a platform, and same for Facebook. Twitter has a similar profile, but it's also especially appealing to African Americans and urban residents. Pinterest is particularly appealing to women. And what they mean by especially appealing to you, I think, is that, Pinterest's overall users skew female. They skew adult over 50. I'm sorry, under 50. It doesn't mean that men and people who are over 50, et cetera, are not on Pinterest. It just means that a large number of their users fit into these categories. Instagram is a little younger, as is Tumblr. And I also want to point out, Pew did not look at teens for this particular study, but we know from other data that Instagram and Tumblr are especially popular with teens. Just this week, there was new data out that shows that teens are moving away from Facebook, although it's still very popular with teens. It seems that the trend for teens is Snapchat, which is kind of a private messaging service, and then Instagram and Tumblr are the places that teens are going to be social. And the Pew data did not look at Google+. I'm not exactly sure why, but so I wanted to pull some other data for you to just show you that it is a very popular platform. It gets bashed a lot in the press, but this slide on the left shows that it's the number 2 social media site worldwide, right after Facebook. And it is mostly male, and it's often techie, and it is younger. But it is still a fairly newish platform, so I think just keep an eye on it and we'll see how that changes. Okay. This is kind of a cheat sheet for you. It's a little hard to put together because there are a lot of different ways that you can use different platforms. But if you really were trying to make a decision about a new platform to try, or you're really just starting out from scratch, you're not on any platform at all, this would be a way to try and tackle that. So, if you mostly have images and you're mostly taking new photos, maybe start with Instagram. If you mostly have images and they're already on your website, maybe try Pinterest as the next platform that you want to try. So again, you can come back to this, but this was kind of a decision tree for how you might pick a platform. Okay. So I don't know if this would be a good time to kind of stop and look at some of the questions that have come in.
Sure, we do have 2 questions for you. Marcia is curious, and this is a complicated one, I'm sure. So the social media platforms, do they happen to have ownership of an individual's content once it's uploaded? She's thinking of issues of copyright, of images and research.
Yeah, so that is a very complicated one. There's a lot going on there. And you've probably seen this in the news that the terms and conditions for various platforms, which when you first sign up are, something that are like 12 pages and you don't read it, you just accept it and move on. There has been controversies about Facebook, for example, saying we own the rights to everything you ever post ever and we can use it however we want. I don't know how to answer that exactly except to say that what you're usually doing is posting a pretty low-res image of something. What that platform would actually do with it is probably not a threat to what you're trying to do, especially if you're using this for educational purposes and you're putting it out there for that reason. I think it's probably a smart idea on your platform. And each platform is different for this, but Facebook does have a pretty big area in your About section to kind of add terms for how people can use your content. So if there are terms for credits or things like that that you need to include, do it. But it is something to be concerned about, especially if you're working with, let's say, contemporary artists or others who own copyright over something that you know. So I would say use the same kinds of but I would not let it preclude me from posting things that generally should be open for people to use that are in your collection.
And then just a follow-up to that question, and I don't know that there is an answer. It's such a complicated topic, and there's a lot of literature on it, and I know a lot of museums have had this concern. Marcia's curious, do you know of a particular platform that would be a safer bet? And I don't think that there is.
But a safer bet for
usurping ownership of your materials.
Oh. I mean, if this is a big concern for you, I would have your general counsel look at the terms of use for the platform. And there are, if you are a government agency, there are often government terms that have been agreed to either at the federal or state level. So make sure that when you sign up for that platform, or if you have already signed up, that you switch to that government terms of use, which can help cover you in some cases. So, for example, on government Facebook pages, or if you're looking at a government Facebook page, you may not see ads for other kinds of things because there's a specific terms and conditions that have been agreed upon between the lawyers in the government and the lawyers at Facebook. So if that's a big concern of yours, I would definitely look to your legal counsel on that.
And then just one other question, which I come across from time to time. Cindy is curious, and others had mentioned it. Are there issues? Are there legal issues with posting images of your collections that have been potentially donated, or identifying names of folks who you're not sure if they want their name online? How would you recommend kind of navigating that field?
That's a good question, and it's challenging because gift agreements were often signed a long time before social media ever came about, or the web came about. If the donor is living and you're concerned, you could always reach out to them. I think it's good to just adopt a policy kind of generally that you will apply across the board. And again, I would work with your legal counsel or your registrar to figure out, do you typically credit the donor in an exhibit label or in a publication? And does that make sense to use that same kind of guidelines online?
Okay, and then just to move on to something completely different, Jessica in Mexico had a question about Google Hangouts, and she's curious if you can record those.
Yes. So you need to make sure that you, when you set up the Hangout, that you're doing it as a Hangout on air, which will kind of take you into a different workflow, and it will ask you if you want to record it when you do that. So just make sure that when you set up a Hangout, you're doing it as a Hangout on air, which is different from a general Hangout, which will typically be private and not recorded. In terms of how you would share it, when you do a Hangout on air, it will automatically go to your YouTube channel, which would be associated with whatever Google account you signed up for.
Perfect. Thank you. That's all we have for now, so feel free, folks, to keep them coming.
Okay, great. All right, let's keep moving. So creating content, what kind of content can you use to engage with audiences? And here's where I've got a lot of examples, and I'm going to kind of fly through them. But here is one example that I often come back to because it's something I don't think I would have ever seen before social media came about. Maybe I would have seen it in a news article, possibly. But I think what it gets at is that social media has really changed what we share with each other, what we talk about, what we think other people will find interesting. You know, this is a painting that is in a box. It's not even in storage. It's being shipped from one place to another. And the Los Angeles County Museum of Art has decided to take a picture of this and share it on Instagram. And they've done it in a way that's a little cheeky, you know, thinking this enormous boxed up, grisky photo really ties the room together. So the way that we talk about things has also changed. It's a little more casual. It might even be a little cheeky or snarky. Snarky I would be careful with, but you know, being a little clever in how you phrase things on social media makes you seem more like there are humans working at your institution, and we all have a sense of humor. And it's, I just think that this illustration is indicative of the ways in which social media has changed our relationship with our audiences. So in terms of identifying content opportunities, I think you always want to look at what assets do you already have that maybe just need to be exposed online. And on the other hand, there might be content that really actually needs to be created, and you need to spend time working on and creating that content for social media. So things like images, video, blog posts, news articles. You can use content that other people are producing online, then talk about it in relationship to your work. So you don't have to create all of this content. You need to create the connection. You can provide access to experts. You can do that through a text chat. You can do it through someone submits a question and you record your curator responding via video, and then you post that video. You can use quotes from people. People really love quotes by historic figures. And you tie a historic quote with an object in your collection. And also conversation, so questions and prompts. You know, it takes time to think of a good question. Think of any interview you've ever done with someone. Coming up with a question that's rich and interesting takes time, but it's not the same kind of time that it takes to record and edit a video. So think about all the different kinds of content and ways that you can communicate with your audience. All right, I'm going to talk for the next couple of minutes about photos, and a lot of my examples have photos, and it's because the web has become a very, very visual place. Photos perform the best on Facebook to get the most likes if you compare them to text posts, video posts, or links. What's interesting is that photos also get a lot of comments, but actually text posts, so where you just type a question, say, or a fill in the blank, they actually get the most comments, but then photos are a close second. Photos are shared by far more than anything else on Facebook. So if you are trying to spread the word about something, posted as a photo. So let's say it's an announcement. We have a new collection object. You put those words on an image and post it on Facebook, and I'll give you a tool later on how to do that. And then that will be shared much more than if you just post, a piece of text with a link. And Facebook itself will tell you that photo posts typically receive 120% more engagement than any other kind of post on Facebook. So try whatever you can to get images. And they don't always have to be amazing, huge, high quality images. They can be a quick snapshot that you took with your iPhone. I think, again, this kind of change in how we communicate, we've become more casual. We're used to more grainy kinds of photos. If you have better high quality photos, that's fantastic, and you should certainly post those. If you don't let that preclude you from getting an image of something and using it so that you can reach more people. And another tip on Facebook specifically is it's really easy to just have a link to something, but the Facebook sort of algorithm does not favor link posts, so less people will actually see it in their news feed if there's no image. So you can just take an extra minute and upload the photo separately and then include your link. So on the left is what the National Museum of American History posted. It said this image of this buffalo nickel from the 1930s was altered to include some impressive facial hair. And they uploaded a photo of that buffalo nickel. And I run a page called Engaging Museums, so that's what's on the right. I've taken the same exact content and I tested, if I just posted the text and the link to the blog, what would I see? And what you see is what's called a link preview. But A, it's not the right photo. And B, this kind of post does not get as heavily weighted in Facebook. So if you can take the extra few minutes to upload your image separately, do that. Here's another example of that, where yesterday the Smithsonian launched a new 3D Explorer in which you can interact with and download 3D data about a couple of their objects. And on the right is if I had just taken the content and linked to it. And on the left is the National Museum of American History took a screenshot of that website and put text on that image and said, the gunboat Philadelphia sunk in 1776. Today you can explore it in 3D. And what's smart about doing it this way, they still have a link to the website above, but now I'm more inclined to share this image, and other people are now going to see this case because I'm sharing the image. Far fewer people will hit share on what you see on the right. Okay. There are many, many, many tools that you can use for image editing, and I have lots of experience and access to high-quality software like Photoshop, and that's fantastic. But I also use tools like PicMonkey, which is a free tool, which I just use in my browser. It's not software. I don't have to download it onto my computer. And I can make a collage. I can upload an image and put some text on it. And I personally think it's a really fun tool. So that's fun to check out. On the left, I've got an image that was posted to Instagram by Mount Vernon. I don't know that they use PicMonkey, but they could easily have created this in PicMonkey and then uploaded it to Instagram. They took a photo of their landscape and put some words on it that kind of draw some visual attention, and then they uploaded it. And once they uploaded it to Instagram, they could also post it to Facebook or other platforms. So I'm not paid by PicMonkey. It's a free tool, but I do think it's a really fun, easy tool to use if you don't, if not all of your staff have access to something like Photoshop, for example, and you don't really need a lot of digital editing skills to use a tool like PicMonkey. I also want to say that images are really important on Twitter as well. This wasn't always the case, but Twitter has kind of changed its interface, so now you can see images in the feed. So that's what you're seeing on the right. On the left, I've just done a screenshot of Twitter's instructions on how to upload images. And Twitter itself has said, tweets with photos get twice the response, which really surprised me, to be honest. I figured it would be higher, but that's quite high. And one little note, if you are using something like Hootsuite or Buffer or something like that to post to Twitter, you want to be careful with images because they may not show up this way. They may just show up as a link. So sometimes it's worth taking a little bit of extra time to go over to twitter.com and type in your tweet and upload your image directly through twitter.com or through Tweetdeck, which has recently been purchased by Twitter. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a couple of different examples of the kinds of content that seems to be quite successful online on social media. So things like Caption Contest. You know, you post a photo, you ask for a caption, and a couple of days later you say, great, this caption was the best. So you're both sharing images in your collection, but you're also encouraging people to participate, and then you're acknowledging that person for their participation. Identification is another big one we see with images online. Here's an example of, you know, who is in this photo. And actually, if you look at the comments, someone said, I see a couple of the Sellers boys from Georgetown. And so people have identified who is in this photo. So this is a way that people can both identify things and be involved, but also this institution may not have known that the Sellers family was in this photo. Now that can become part of the records associated with this collection item. So on the one hand, it's something fun and engaging for people, and on the other, it's part of your serious work of documenting your collection. Here's another example of identification. And in this one, someone said, I think that pickup truck is my grandmother's. And I just want to point out that these are not always necessarily very large institutions. The Fairfield County District Library does not have a ton of fans in terms of absolute numbers, but they've got really engaged fans. Look at these comments. People are really engaged in this content that has to do with their local history. And I see a couple of people asking about hashtags. So here you actually see an example of a hashtag, although it's used a little bit strangely because it's got space. You see this, and then the pound sign, Throwback Thursday. So actually, typically, you would want Throwback Thursday to be all one word with the pound sign. But what happens if you use a hashtag is you can see that it's blue, and that means I can click on it. So if I clicked on Throwback in this example, I would see other posts on Facebook that are public that also include that hashtag. This is something that really started out on Twitter, but it is something that works on Facebook as well as Google+. And I'll show you several examples of hashtags in a moment. Hopefully that addresses that question. Behind the scenes content is so popular. And you know this from when you invite people to see behind the scenes in person. So it also works online. Here's an example of an archivist, let's see, using a tub of water and a razor to pry a photograph from the glass it was fused to. Here's an example of actually a fundraising campaign in which they've used a photo of conservation as a way to try and get people to donate. And actually it says here, let's see. So this is what your money can support. Here's an example of someone using a Facebook photo album, which just means you upload a couple of photos at the same time and they become an album, to show how they rehoused negatives. This is from Instagram. This is Mount Vernon showing, hey, we received a grant, and this is what the grant is funding, and we're restoring this large dining room. And here's another example of behind the scenes kind of conservation work. Again, this is Instagram. So other kinds of content that work well at tying your collection items to important dates or observances. On the left, we've got the Folger Shakespeare Library talking about something in their collection that has to do with breast cancer, nearing the end of Breast Cancer Awareness Month. On the right is voting day. And, you know, hey, if you're about to go out and vote, think about how you got the right to vote. And here's an example of something in our collection that documents how that happened. Okay, here are a couple of examples of hashtags. Throwback Thursday is a big one, and this is one that is popular outside of the museum arena. I see all kinds of people using Throwback Thursday. And it basically just means something from the past that you post on Thursday. On the left is an example where TBT is just the abbreviated version of that. And in this case, they've actually used Throwback Thursday as a way to get people to guess where the photo was taken. So they know the answer in this case, but it's a way to get people to interact with their content. And another Throwback Thursday on the right, that's Twitter. So you can just see how, in both cases, the hashtag itself becomes a hyperlink. And if I click that, I'll find other things that go along with that hashtag. Tuesday is a fun one. It's basically, it's Tuesday. Post something that's related to shoes. On the left is Mount Vernon, and that's a horseshoe. And on the right, I wanted to show you an example of American History has posted a link to slippers, but not an image. And you can see kind of pretty immediately why the one on the left is a little more engaging. World Cat Day. I mean, you can find all kinds of hashtags, and you can find lots of ways to tie into what's going on in the world. In this case, the museums were clever and tied into World Cat Day, which I didn't even know existed. Star Wars Day is another fun one, which is May the 4th, as in May the 4th be with you. And, I would just encourage you to just take a look at what other people are posting about and kind of hop on the bandwagon with some of those. Just be careful when you see a hashtag, if you don't know what it means. There is a website called What the Hashtag, which will help you define what the hashtag is for. You really don't want to use a hashtag that you don't understand if it could potentially be something controversial or you don't know why it's being used. And some companies have gotten themselves in trouble by kind of inappropriately using hashtags. For example, during Hurricane Sandy, I believe a retail store used the Hurricane Sandy hashtag to say, hey, if your power's out, come shop and buy shoes. And that is not a good, it's not a good thing to do PR-wise for you. So try to be sure that you know what the hashtag is all about before you use it. Q&A, you can do in lots of different ways. On the left is an example of Ask an Archivist, in which there was a certain period of time on a specific day in which Smithsonian Archive said, hey, you can ask our archivist questions and we'll be on Facebook at this time. On the right is a different kind of example. Ask a Curator is one day of the year, and lots of museums around the world participate. But here's an example of someone that posed a question, and what they've done is filmed a video response. Rather than just responding by text, they took the time to film a video to answer the question. Tweetups I mentioned a little earlier. This is an interesting kind of cross-section of, not a cross-section, a crossover between the physical and virtual world. So a tweet up is when you invite people who are active on Twitter, come do something at your physical space and tweet about it while they're doing it. And so those 10 people, say, it's usually a small group, have a really intense, interesting experience physically, and then they share it with their followers via Twitter. So on the left, there's people looking at wet collections at the Smithsonian. On the right is one about Suited for Space, which is an exhibition at the National Air and Space Museum, that you can see they're talking about urine and fecal collection in space, which is actually apparently a very popular question. How do astronauts go to the bathroom? So it's something to keep in mind, is that you're going to invite these people in and they're going to say whatever it is that they would want to say to their followers. And so it's a little bit out of your control. You can set some parameters, but actually one of the things that's kind of fun and interesting about it is that people take photos and talk about your collections in ways that you might not. And it gives another dimension to what you do. So I'm going to just talk a little bit, and I think you'll see that these themes have come up in the examples I've shown you. So we all love to laugh. We all enjoy content that teaches us how to do something very specific, and I think you'll probably see things like videos on how to preserve your own personal photographs, family photographs, things like that are really useful to people, a how-to. Secrets are really things revealing secrets, and I think this is part of why behind the scenes is really interesting to people, things that challenge our assumptions, and visual information in general, so slideshows, infographics, photos. When you're thinking about creating new content, I think these are the things that you want to think about. What is it that people want to know? I'm sure you have a list in your mind. We always get asked these 5 questions. You know, find a way to answer those in clever ways. Maybe do videos, maybe do blog posts, whatever platform is best for you, or whatever media is best for you to answer those questions, address those. Or you can make a list of those and say, okay, within the next year, we're gonna answer every one of these. How can you enrich their questioning, and how can you develop understanding through dialogue with people? So I'm going to ask you to take a moment again, just think about what are some of the assets that you have that could be used on social media. And maybe are there any things that have come up in these examples of ideas or new content that you might want to adopt or use? And I'm going to keep moving because we do have a couple more things I want to make sure we get to, but definitely make a note to come back and think about those things. So another way to think about content is, what is it that you want your fans to do in response to that content? Do you want them to respond? Do you want them to share it? Do you want them to just like it? So the kinds of content that works well, if you want people to respond, ask them a question. Do a fill in the blank. You know, the first book I read that I really loved was blank. Ask them to submit photos or video or text in response to a question. Ask them to caption contest. If you want them to share, make sure that you say the word share in your post or retweet. You know, please retweet this. Don't do this all the time. It can be annoying and a little demanding, but at the same time, you know, marketers have done all kinds of studies on this, and if you use the word share or like or comment, people will share or like or comment in much higher percentages. And there's also advice on including it in the first 90 characters of your text. You know, ask people to identify people, create images that are specifically designed for sharing. So the example I gave where you put the text on top of the image, and then that way the whole thing is shared as one package. People like timely news, people like inspirational, moving, and humorous content. So a couple of Facebook best practices. These are from Facebook themselves. So shorter posts get more likes and comments. They encourage you to post very regularly. Obviously, you can only do what you have the capacity to do. And they found that questions and fill in the blank gets 90% more engagement than just a post that says, here's a thing. You know, so here's a thing, what do you think about it? Or here's a thing, what does it remind you of? Or what questions does it bring up for you? You know, asking people to engage. And here's that data where they say include, share, or like in the first 90 characters if that's what you want people to do. These best practices are about Twitter. Again, shorter is better. I think partially because it's easier to retweet or, you know, repost a tweet if it's already short. They suggest that you post frequently and throughout the day, that you include usernames so that you're talking to people. You're not just speaking, you're mentioning people and responding to people by including their username and including hashtags and photos, twice their response. So this data is about Facebook, but I found it to be true for Twitter as well and other platforms as well. And think about when are people on social media. I mean, people are on social media at all hours of the day, but especially in the evenings, Eastern time, and on Saturday and Sunday. So it's important to think about scheduling, because unless you want your staff to be posting, you know, at 11:30 at night, they can schedule content ahead of time. And I've included here, Facebook has instructions on how you can schedule a post ahead of time. And you can do the same thing on Twitter, but you have to use the ads.twitter.com interface, which does not mean that you have to pay for ads, but you just have to log in differently. Or you can use a third-party service, such as Hootsuite, Tweetdeck, or Buffer, all of which have free versions, and you can schedule your tweets ahead of time. And I highly recommend this, because you can be reaching people at different times of day, might be reaching people in different time zones, but you can also be more efficient by scheduling all of your posts for the week at the beginning of the week. And then what you do for the rest of the week is just see what kinds of responses that you're getting, and what you're spending your time on for the rest of the week is engaging rather than thinking of new content every day. You get all of your content kind of set up, and then that way you can react to what's timely and new as it comes. I'm going to skip this slide for now, but definitely take a look at it. It just gets at why it's important to have a content strategy and to be intentional about your content and plan ahead. Voice and tone is also important. We talked about cheeky. Cheeky is probably something you're not in your press releases, but maybe you want to have a different voice on social media, or maybe you don't. You just need to be intentional and think about what you want your personality to be. And this is also important if you have multiple people writing and creating content for your social media. You need to have some guidelines so people know what is the voice that our organization has online. So this is something you might want to do later on, but I found it very useful to come up with a list of contrasting values that illustrate what you want your personality to be. So for example, we want to be clever, but we don't want to be snarky. We want to be friendly, but we don't want to be cheesy. Coming up with these kind of paired words can help you describe and explain to people who are writing for you what kinds of voice is appropriate. I definitely recommend this idea of a content calendar. If you can swing the time, it actually, I found in the end, will make you more efficient. So, you can even plan out all of your content for a month and then post it in bulk. Of course, keeping an eye on if there are things that come up that would make that content inappropriate, and then take it down. If there's some kind of a natural disaster, or in the case of people like me, I was part of the federal government shutdown, we had to unschedule our posts. So make sure that you're not just scheduling and forgetting. But if you come up with your content ahead of time, you can kind of space things out, build a story over time, and then again, you can focus your daily, day-to-day amount of time that you have for social media on responding to people and reacting to new news and other things like that. So you could do this monthly. You could do a year-long, not where you're writing everything out for the year, but at least listing out, okay, we know in November this big exhibition is opening. What content do we want to create for social media? Let's make sure that we have that as part of our work schedule now, so planning ahead. And you also want to think about the various kinds of things. I think that you're all in different size organizations, and so you may have just one person or 1/8 of a person working on social media, or you may have a couple of people who have a little bit of their time. And so just thinking about that there are various tasks involved. Who writes, who edits, who actually goes in and posts may not be the same person. It doesn't have to be the same person. You could have a different person who is better with customer service, working on responses to people and questions that come in, from someone who's creating content that you're posting fresh. And I think I've seen in the chat box a little bit people asking about cross-posting, and I definitely think you want to cross-post. My caveat is you want to tailor the post for each channel. So every channel has its own visual style, its own feel, but your core message can be the same, and you can repurpose assets like images across various platforms. And I think that is the smart, efficient way to leverage what you're doing on social media. So here's an example of that. At the National Museum of American History, we did something called Race to the Museum, which was people could vote from a set of, I can't remember exactly, but a certain number of cars they could vote on, and we would take several of those out of storage and put them on display. We first posted about this on our blog, and then we posted on Facebook. For each automobile, we did a separate Facebook post. And we used Hootsuite as a platform for monitoring how people were using Twitter to talk about us. So you can see on the right there, we came up with a hashtag Race to Museums, and we could monitor using Hootsuite by doing a search for that hashtag. This was the super simple voting platform. We just used something like SurveyMonkey, where people could just pick one. And this was completely free and online. There was basically no budget except for putting the actual things on display. There was no budget for the social media or the outreach or the marketing for this. And yet we landed a half cover or back cover of the Washington Post Arts and Style section about this initiative that we were doing, which I understood from my PR staff that would have, if we had paid for an ad that size, it would have been $50,000. So we landed that by doing something clever using social media that cost us no money. And in addition, we did a little video on the day of the moving day. You know, this was one of the cars that was selected, and so we had the curator kind of talk about, look, here we are in storage, and this car is getting ready to be moved over to the museum and put on display. Thank you for voting. So these are the two cars that were voted on and on display. And here are the results we got. Now, this was the Smithsonian, so there's the brand name there, but again, we had no budget for this. And we got a pretty astounding response, 24,000 votes in 3 weeks. So that's one example of how you can kind of use different forms to talk about one initiative. In that case, I did all of the posting manually myself separately. You can use a tool like if this, then that, and that automatically posts from one platform to another. I think this is where you can run into trouble if you're not careful, because things don't always translate well from one platform to another. But in some cases, they do. So you could say, if we post a new photo on Instagram, I want you to automatically put it on Tumblr. And that works okay because the amount of space I have on Instagram to put in a caption works pretty well on Tumblr as well. So I would say use something like this sparingly, but if you really have limited time and you do have an audience on various platforms, you can use a tool like this, which is also free, to syndicate content across platforms. Okay. I know that we're running out of time. I'm just going to run through this last little section on evaluation because I think it's really important, and then I can stay on and answer questions. Again, if you have a question that you haven't gotten to, you can put it in the chat and include your email address, and I will follow up with you. So, evaluating success. I think that the kind of baseline way that people typically evaluate success is they look at how many fans or followers they have. And this is what we call vanity metrics. They're only useful to a point, and they don't really help you understand what you should change or do differently, or if you're really being successful. In this case, on the left, I'm using a tool called Simply Measured to compare my, let's say I work for Colonial Williamsburg and I want to compare myself with Mystic Seaport. On the right, Twitter Counter will do that same thing for you for Twitter. I think these are the kinds of stats that are the easiest to get, and so we often turn to those, but they, again, I don't think that they help you become a better social media practitioner. The tool that I find really interesting and useful is Facebook Insights. So here I'm looking at who likes my page demographically. So again, thinking back to those audiences, what's interesting about this is the blue is you and the gray is all of Facebook. So what's happening here is all of Facebook is really popular with 18 to 24-year-olds. However, 18 to 24-year-olds are not a huge percentage of my audience. On the other hand, 55 to 64-year-olds there are less of on Facebook, but I am overrepresented with that audience. So I'm really reaching 55 to 64-year-olds on Facebook. You can look at that same metric, but what you're looking at is people engaged versus the people that are your fans. And so again, here I'm seeing that actually, even though I don't have a huge number of 18 to 24-year-olds who are fans of my page, I'm really engaging them. And I'm also engaging them, I'm engaging that audience much more than I might guess just based on how many numbers of 18 to 24-year-olds I have. So there's some interesting data in Facebook you can find out about your audience. And I would say Facebook is currently the most sophisticated in terms of what you can learn about your audience without having to pay a third party to find out. The number one thing I would do for your evaluation, if you can only do one thing, is once a month or once a quarter, go back through everything you posted and see what got the most clicks, what got the most comments, and what was retweeted the most, or liked the most, and least. So what got no retweets, what got no responses, and try to figure out, okay, what do these things have in common? Of the 10 most popular posts, what do they have in common? Let's do more of that. Of the 10 least interacted with, let's do less of that. And so it takes some time and some brain power, but I find it to be really useful and will really make sure that you are using the time that you have for social media as best as you can for the most effective use of it. So in Twitter, you can do that by going to adtwitter.com, and you can see how your tweets have performed. You can see how many times they were clicked or favorited or retweeted. And in Facebook, you can do this through Page Insights. You can see how often things were liked or commented on or shared. This is just an example of how the National Archives thinks about evaluation for Tumblr. And they shared a graph with us of how they track Tumblr followers and the average Tumblr increase per day. But again, this doesn't necessarily help us understand what we could do better or what posts are working the best or how we should change to improve the efficacy of our social media. If you do have a little bit of cash, and I mean a little bit of cash, $10, $100, you can use Facebook ads to increase the number of likes of your page. And on Twitter, you can do the same thing. It's called promoted Twitter accounts, and it's very inexpensive. And I highly recommend it, especially if you're pretty early on in the account or you're just not seeing a lot of growth. This is a good way to kind of boost your reach right before a big announcement, let's say. Start getting new fans right before, maybe 2 weeks before you make an announcement, and then you have a wider audience when you make that announcement. A couple other tips, following other users, responding and interacting, spreading your posts out. And I think I'm just going to wrap up by saying that there are other ways to evaluate. Here's an example of the National Museum of American History, or I actually think this is the National Postal Museum, did a survey of all of their Facebook fans and said, hey, as a result of our Facebook page, have you visited us, planned to visit, attended one of our programs, learned something new? These are the kinds of information that you can't get just by looking at your social media platforms. You really have to ask people. And I think this is great data. It shows, hey, social media is important to our mission. People learned something new because of our Facebook page. People told somebody else about us if we shared information with a friend. 54% of our fans on Facebook told somebody else about us because of Facebook. This really shows why it's important and justifiable for you to spend time on social media. Erin Blasco is a great person to follow on Twitter. She is the social media manager at American History, which is the job I used to have. And she's pretty transparent and open about the things that they learn, so that she'd be an interesting person for you to keep track of. And she recently wrote that somebody said in their Facebook survey that following the museum on Facebook brings it to mind, whereas otherwise I wouldn't think of it at all. That's another way to think about success. Here's another example from her in which she said, why has following our museum on Facebook improved your opinion of the museum? Because now I know more about it. It used to intimidate me. I'm impressed by the depth of the collection. This kind of information, just by doing a survey, can be so useful to you. And finally, if you're trying to figure out, there's so many different numbers you collect, which is the most important? Think back to your goals. Are you trying to create advocates? Then shares and retweets are your most valuable metrics because those are signs of your audience sharing your content with their network. If you want to engage in dialogue, then comments and replies are your most valuable metrics. And if what you most care about is reaching the most amount of people that you can, then the number of likes and followers is your most important metric. So what does success mean for you, and how might you find evidence of success? I would ask you to just take a moment and think about that and write it down and maybe share it in the chat. So I see, for example, new guests to the museum as an answer. How would you know that social media has resulted in new guests to the museum? You're probably going to have to ask the people who come to your museum, did you see something on Facebook or Twitter, et cetera, that encouraged you to visit? Great. So again, we talked about setting goals, selecting platforms, creating content, and evaluating success. And I really see this as an iterative process. You know, you set a goal, you try some things, and you see if it's working. And then you might need to reevaluate your goals or change what platforms you're using. I think we're all learning as we go with social media. It's still a fairly new thing, and there's always a new platform, and there's always, even with a platform like Facebook that's been around for a while, they're always changing what you can do with it, how it works. And so being flexible is really key. But I think being intentional about what you're trying to achieve and making sure to regularly evaluate if you're achieving that will make sure that you're spending your time wisely. And I'm just going to finish up by giving you some recommended resources. The Muse social hashtag on Twitter is great for conversations about how museums use social media. My blog is the Engaging Museums blog, and I talk about social media topics, among other kinds of museum technology topics. Know Your Own Bone is written by Colleen Dillon. Well, her last name is longer than that, but Colleen Dillon. A really smart person who uses statistical data from her work to show you how social media can help you achieve your mission. And she also debunks a lot of myths about social media. Highly recommend her blog. And I've already talked about the Digital Engagement Framework, which is a fantastic tool. So that's it for me. Again, if you include questions in the chat, I will try to follow up. And Jenny, I don't know if you have any other wrap-up items to talk about.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to go ahead and pull over a link to the final assignment, which is the evaluation for the course. So please make sure to fill that out, even if you aren't interested in officially completing the course. And Dana, we're at 3:30, but I'm going to ask you this because I think it might be a quick answer. Sarah Dickey in California is curious, how much posting is too much?
Oh, well, that's a good problem to have. You have so much content, so much time that you're posting all the time. I think you'll know if posting is too much if you start to lose fans and followers, and you can see that statistic in Facebook and Twitter specifically, and you can also find it on some of the other platforms as well. So it really depends on your audience, and that is actually something, again, I recommend asking your fans directly through a survey, or even just, you could post it as a question, how often do you want to hear from us, or do we post too little or too much? I've almost never seen somebody say that you're posting too much, because the reality is your fans don't see everything that you post, and not everything you post will show up in everybody's Facebook feed, for example, or even on Twitter. So I don't think that there is necessarily an answer, except if you're saying the same thing over and over, 10 times a day. But ask your fans, and also keep an eye on how many unfollows and unlikes you get. And if you start to see that spike and it correlates with you posting more often, then it's probably a sign you're posting too often.
Gotcha. Good problem to have, though.
Yes.
I've also just pulled over this group attendance. So if you're watching in a group, if you could go ahead and put all your group members in there. We just like to have an idea of exactly who's watching with us. And that's it, guys. Thank you so, so much for participating in this entire course. And also if you participated in other courses in the series, it's been a lot of fun for us. And we look forward to working with you guys and seeing you guys in the future on the online community. Dana, thank you so much for today. That was fantastic, and I'm sure a resource people will be turning to over and over again. So thank you.
Great, thanks. I hope it was useful, and again, I'm happy to answer follow-up questions. Thanks for joining me.
Everyone have a fantastic afternoon. Take care.